Today, as you've noticed, we have a heavenly chorus up in the balcony. Thank you, choir. The opening lines of the United Church Creed are, "We are not alone. We live in God's world." And I have to admit, I come up with these sermon titles about a month in advance because we put them on the board outside and they have to be printed off early in the month. And so the sermon title for today, "What If You're Not Alone?" I was thinking kind of more cosmically. To give you an example, back when Star Wars movies were on pretty well consistently on the big screen, a group of Christians, a group of us, clergy, went out to see one of them. I can't even remember which rendition it was. And I don't remember whether it was Luke or Leia who said, "May the force be with you." And without even hesitating, we all shouted, "And also with you." And I was also thinking about a show I was lucky enough to see, and it's still on, and you should try to get to see it if you haven't. And that is at the AGO, and that's the Kusama exhibit. It really is quite spectacular. And she said, to quote, "My life is a dot lost in a universe of 1,000 dots." It's kind of the theme of her show. What I wanted to talk about was the epidemic of isolation and loneliness in our city and in our country. And it's funny, the old Yiddish saying, when you make plans, God laughs. Well, God, she's laughing right now because what I was planning to talk about couldn't be more appropriate in a sense in light of what's happened this week in Toronto. When I think about isolation, I think about the person who committed those crimes as the most isolated of people, sitting in a basement, thinking that he had some community online that wasn't real, that wasn't manifest, that was, in fact, quite awful, quite misogynist, quite part of the war on women. When I think of those victims of the serial killer in the LGBTQ village, I think the same, this solitary, isolated individual committing crimes, nobody knew, nobody cared, it seemed. Very isolated. And then the victims, too. That aloneness, that loneliness. I was thinking in particular of one of the victims of the attack this week, Renuka Amarasinghe, who's a CUPE member. CUPE lost 3 of their members. Out of 10 were CUPE members. A single mom, and parents here will ring with this when I say, I bet her last thoughts before she died were, who's going to pick up my son? My little boy. And so I think of her aloneness in that moment, and I think of her son's aloneness when his mother didn't show up to pick him up. It's kind of our worst fear as parents. And I think of the aloneness of the traffic cop. He was a traffic cop, Ken Lam, who did the right thing. He did the professional thing. He didn't increase the violence. But I think of that moment in his head, standing there alone, facing the perpetrator, what must have gone through his head and his heart and his soul. What do I do? Very, very alone, that moment. So a lot of aloneness. But here's the interesting reality behind trauma of all sorts. And I know that when I look out over you, that I'm looking out over people who have been touched by trauma, almost everyone. It's very difficult to live in this world for any length of time without being touched by some sort of trauma. But in our Delving Deeper group last week, which, by the way, we had 30 people crammed into the memorial room, out, people just hungering for a little bit more than the sermon, that when they talked about their mystical experiences, their experiences of the divine, their experiences of God in this life, most of them had those experiences associated with trauma of some sort. The mystical seems to be there when the situation in our lives is at its worst. that's when we meet the risen one. That's when God is truly with us. And not only that, but if we're lucky enough, if we are blessed enough to be part of a faith community, not only is the risen one and God with us in those moments, but an entire community of love encircles us and looks after us. I could go on about what our pastoral care committee does in their accompaniment with those who are in crisis or those who just need a visit. It's phenomenal in this place. It's the gold standard. And just to be prayed for, how beautiful is that? To know that a whole community is praying for you and holding you and loving you. That is Christ manifest as well. That's mystical too, and that's real. That's called community, and that's here. And no matter how much you think you're connecting online, it's no replacement for real human interaction, real human prayer, real human need and responses to that need. And what we saw, of course, as the week unfolded, was how the community rose up and embraced the victims. And what a difference this will make in their lives. But why should it take such tragedy on such a mass level? And remember, we're particularly vulnerable, we're hurting in the city because it happened here, but it's happening everywhere around our world. The same week, 33 people in Yemen at a wedding were destroyed. You know, people in China have been killed. If you look at the news every day of the week, someone somewhere is the victim of some trauma. And we will be too someday. There's no doubt. The only question is when. I remember a young girl, she was about 14 at the time, 14 or 15. She has a hard time remembering dates around there because of the trauma. But she walked into her stepfather's bedroom to find that he had shot himself. And she knew in that moment that there was a kind of call upon her, that she was the one that was going to have to help the adults, not the other way around. She was the one that was going to have to step up and do something. But she didn't have a faith community around her. She didn't believe in God, and she wasn't raised in any kind of faith community. And because of that, there was a kind of blockage about having a mystical experience, although in looking back at that, she saw that she had, because she had dreams leading up to that moment. Children are very sensitive, and they know when somebody's hurting, even if they can't verbalize it. That little girl was me, and the ensuing years for me were not easy. But I contrast it with another death much later of the father of my children. Again, this accident wasn't in any way foretold. But when the police came to my door on that night, I was a member of a faith community. I was already at Emmanuel College. The first thing I did was pray. I prayed with my children while they slept because I knew that this might have impact upon them. And within a day, there were casseroles at my door. My minister came to see me. The community were there. I was prayed for. And the funeral was a celebration of his life. What a difference. One of the things I said in delving deeper last week was, I feel sorry for folk who don't have this. I do. I pray for them, that they might find it. I think in a sense, Toronto, coming out of this tragedy, might find this more frequently, might understand, maybe for the first time, how important it is to be prayed for, to have a sense of community, to have people looking out for you and after you, real people in the flesh, helping you when you need it most. How important is that? Jesus, in our scripture passage today, describes himself as the vine. And the vine was a metaphor for Israel. He really substitutes himself for Israel. And Israel, for Jews of his day, and he was a rabbi, for Jews of his day, Israel was home. Home. Jesus is saying, I'm home. I'm your home. Rest in me. Have your being in me. I will be there when you need me most. And he said this on the eve of his crucifixion. He knew he was going to die. And he said, I will be there still when you need me most. And if you're not with me, that's when you're going to really hurt. Please come home. He's saying, please come home. And really, in his resurrection stories, it's all about eating, gardening, home. They're homey stories of how Christ appears to us in the everyday, but does appear to us. When we think of some of our brothers and sisters in the Roman Catholic tradition where nuns pledge themselves as the brides of Christ, we think of that almost erotic sense of we are one with Christ. One of the phrases that came to my mind, so I thought I'd do some investigation after the van attack, was the phrase we all know, the dark night of the soul, because I'm sure a lot of people in the city were having the dark night of the soul around what happened. It was written by St. John of the Cross, who's a 16th century mystic. He was trained by a nun, and he didn't have a very happy life. He died young, and most of his latter years were spent being tortured by another rival group within the Catholic Church, in that case, the Carmelites. Don't hold anything against the Carmelites now, but not a pretty history. So after this torture, after his imprisonment, after all of that had gone down, he wrote a poem. The Dark Night of the Soul is the name of the poem he wrote. Who knew? I didn't know that. And it's just one poem, and I'm going to read it to you. This is what he wrote. On a dark night, kindled in love with yearnings, oh happy chance, I went forth without being observed, my house being now at rest. In the happy night, in secret, when none saw me, nor I beheld aught, without light nor guide, save that which burned in my heart, this light guided me more surely than the light of noonday to the place where he, well, I know who, was awaiting me, a place where none appeared. O night that guided me, O night more lovely than the dawn, O night that joined beloved with lover, lover transformed in the beloved, upon my flowery breast, kept holy for himself alone, there he stayed sleeping, and I caressed him, and the fanning of the cedars made a breeze. The breeze blew from the turret as I parted his locks. With his gentle hand he rounded my neck and caused all my senses to be suspended. I remained lost in oblivion. My face I reclined on the beloved. All ceased, and I abandoned myself, leaving my cares forgotten among the lilies. It don't sound so bad. It's profoundly homoerotic, which none of the commentary commented upon, of course, but it's a love poem. It's a poem of love at the worst of all possible times in his life. He is experiencing that mystic union. He's going home to his beloved. It's a beautiful love poem. Who knew? That is what the dark night of the soul can look like. Wow. I remember a quote, I had to look it up again because it's years old, but I heard it on some television show that some Sunday school teacher reported. She said that one of the 10-year-olds in her class said this to her when the kids were asked to, really share what had happened at their house that week, and he said, "My brother asked me what happened when we die. I told him we get buried under a bunch of dirt and a bunch of worms eat our bodies. I guess I could have told him the truth, that most of us go to hell and burn in fire forever, but I didn't want to upset him. Wow. The opposite of the dark night of the soul. The opposite of the dark night of the soul. The dark night of the soul is a saga of love. Those who've experienced trauma know. They know if they have faith, and they know whether they have faith or not, because Christ will meet them eventually. They certainly know if they're part of a faith community, that they are not alone, that they never have to walk that path alone. Hence the opening lines of our creed. We are not alone. We live in God's world. The truth is, of course, that we're all terminal cases. And the truth is, of course, that we will all meet trauma one day. That's the truth. We will be tested. We will be tested every bit as much in our own ways, in our small lives, maybe not on the big media screen, in the big and public fashion that those have been tested who were immediately touched by this tragedy this week or by the serial killings earlier this year. But we will experience trauma, and we will be tested. But here's the difference. Here's the difference. We will be ready. We will know it when it comes. We will know we are not alone. We will see the risen one. In fact, we will behold the risen one like St. John of the Cross as our beloved, our beloved. We will recognize love. It will be there for us. It will meet us wherever we meet trauma, wherever we meet death. It will be there for us if we but look. And so will this church. That is our pledge to you and everyone you know. That's why you come here, and that's why you should bring your friends. Now we see in a glass darkly, Paul wrote those beautiful words, but then we will see face to face. The final words, the closing words of our creed, beautiful creed, are, in life, in death, in life beyond death, we are not alone. Amen.